I've lived in 60 cities, which sounds like a lot. Some were as short as a week, others were a few months, but once you start moving, it's hard to stop. When you decide to disappear, it isn't nearly as easy as it sounds. Everyone tends to assume that it's easy to drop off the grid totally, to just walk away from the life you've lived up to that point and choose a new path. It isn't. At least, not if you don't want to eventually be found again. It isn't as simple as take the money out of the bank, stop going to work, go to a new town. To give myself a head start, and to make sure that it was clear that Faye wasn't involved, I had to do the legwork to provide misinformation to the people chasing me. I'm not going to go into a whole breakdown of how I managed to vanish. If you really want to plan it for yourself, there are plenty of materials available. I'm just going to give an overview, to make it clear how I approached the whole thing. First, I gave business cards and cash to friends who worked overseas. I told them that they would be doing me a huge favor, and nobody suspected anything, or if they did, they never voiced their concerns. One went to China, another to Western Europe. Every time they left a card, it was a marker that someone would have to investigate at a cursory level at least, which would buy me time. 2 of our friends had just gotten married, and had went to South America on their honeymoon. When we went to their home for a dinner party, I excused myself and quickly photoshopped tiny photos of my face into the mulling crowds behind the couple's smiling selfies. When the photos were posted on Facebook, any kind of facial recognition would hopefully find me in the background and again demand some level of investigation. Lastly, I randomly picked 4 towns off a map. I bought a prepaid cell phone, and when I should have been working, I looked up apartments for rent in those locations. I called and made appointments to look. Appointments I never intended to keep. I called water services, cable and internet providers, magazine companies, all to set up subscriptions or knowingly false installation dates. For the people listening to this who recoil and think to themselves, what a jackass, you can bottle your displeasure. When a company like that comes to a place to make an installation and there isn't anyone there, they simply don't do the installation. It's no skin off their nose. For the callback numbers on all those appointments, I made sure to give the number to the nearest police or federal authority station. I doubted the people who sent the email would be worried, but I fully intended to make it clear that I was meeting them step for step. For every sales plan or rewards program I belonged to, I called and changed my information slightly. I purposely misspelled my name or had them fix my address to one of the 4 towns I had picked, or to a P.O. box that I had prepaid just for this. Everything was done with one reason: to make it as time-consuming as possible to hunt down every lead I could place, in order to give me time to find a way out of this mess. To make sure I didn't lose the information I had saved on the USB drive from the email, I printed everything out from it twice, and sent each set of copies to a different P.O. box owned by private companies. Again, this isn't a how-to, but this is an easy way to break it down. Box A, fake everything, in a town I never planned on visiting. Box B, fake everything, also in a town I never planned on visiting. Box C, real, send 1 copy here, town adjacent to a place I was familiar with. Box D, real, send 1 copy here, town where I plan on disappearing to start with at least. The whole time, I had to keep Faye in the dark. It killed me to see her smiling, or playing with the dog, or to hear her murmur "I love you" as she fell asleep next to me. If I had been able, I would have rewound until just before I had opened that damn email and continued to sit with her for as long as I was able. I managed to keep my misinformation building efforts away from her, but the accidents kept on happening. Our oven broke and the heating element didn't stop getting hotter. I had to shut the power off for the whole house in order to avert a fire. On my way to work, the stoplight glitched just as it turned green for me, staying green for the opposite lanes as well. I almost got T-boned by an old man driving a midlife crisis mobile, and had to grip the steering wheel extra tight to keep from yelling. One afternoon, Faye took Sigmund, we had finally named our little rescue, out for a walk in the backyard. I heard her scream and ran outside with the shotgun. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I wasn't going to go down without making a fight of it. She was holding the puppy and shaking, and she pointed out to the field. Even from that distance, I could make out the timber rattler moving through the grass. She told me that the puppy had noticed it before she did, and she had barely had time to yank back on the leash and move away before the snake had coiled up onto itself and began rattling. I walked out, aimed, and suddenly there was cooling snake blood all over a 5-foot circle. Faye was shaken and asked me if I had ever seen one before. I answered her no, and while we were technically in the range for one, I had never seen a snake like that in a populated area like where we lived. These accidents were getting more and more desperate. I have no doubt that if they had simply wanted me dead, they could have shot me. From my own perspective, it seemed apparent that the desired outcome was to silence me permanently without any foul play being suspected at all. I didn't have any time left. I disappeared on an early Tuesday morning. I had seen a lawyer previously and drawn up divorce papers. I gave Faye everything short of a few $100s. I didn't want to divorce her, but I had to keep propping up the fact that she didn't know anything about EX7 or plans to weaponize Ebola. I kissed her on the cheek as she slept, and quietly got dressed. I had slowly been packing for a few days. A bar of soap here, a shirt there, and was ready to go without more packing. As I got up, Sigmund yawned and looked up at me, his tail wagging. I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying as I scratched behind his ears and kissed him, trying to commit to memory his smell and the feel of Faye's skin under my hand. I signed the divorce papers and left them on the kitchen counter. I tried to write a note, to give some kind of explanation, but nothing came. At least nothing that would keep her safely ignorant of what I had to leave. I ended up writing, "I'm sorry. I will always love you," and left it at that. I left behind everything I had loved, in a last-ditch effort to keep them all safe. It was lonely and terrifying. I've been on the run ever since 2005. 9 years. 9 long, fucking lonely years. I never stopped moving in the first 2 years, staying in one place for no more than 2 months before packing up and moving. I worked odd jobs, always got paid under the table in cash, and lied with a smile every time someone asked me where I was from or about the ring I wore around my neck. I have tried 3 times over the years to get the evidence I have to people who might be able to help me. 2 were politicians and 1 was a news person. I suspect you might recognize their names: Larry Craig, Anthony Weiner, and Tim Russert. I picked the politicians not because they were tough on bioweapons or the vast military-industrial complex, but because they represented states far from my home state. When I reached out to Craig on August 23rd, his staff seemed remote but interested. 4 days later, I turned on the radio and heard that Roll Call was reporting that he had been arrested for lewd conduct. Holy shit. I went underground again after that for the better part of a year, moving and always keeping an eye over my shoulder. I reached out to Russert next, contacting his staff and explaining that I had a story that I would only trust to Russert himself. I was a fan of Meet the Press for a number of years, and always appreciated that he never seemed to play favorites. In the back of my mind, I daydreamed about my life turning out like something from The Pelican Brief. Reuniting with Faye, seeing my parents again, my old employers offering my job back out of pride for my accomplishments. I heard back from them on June 10th of 2008, where his chief of staff explained that Tim would be contacting me personally to set up a meeting. On June 13th, Russert died from an apparent heart attack. I cleared out my meager apartment and was on the next Greyhound bus out of town the same day. After that, I left the US for several years. It was easier to hide in more populated areas, and while my facility with other languages was never fantastic, I knew enough to get by. I crossed back into the country in late 2010 and decided to attempt to go public again. I contacted a junior congressman from New York this time, someone on the opposing side of the political aisle for my first attempt. I actually spoke with Weiner himself, and he offered me protection and his full support in exchange for the information I had. We verbally agreed, and I even traveled to New York City to meet him. We had agreed to meet in a nondescript corner restaurant, but he never showed. I waited for an hour, but nothing. My off-the-grid instincts were screaming, and I vanished into a dive bar. On the TV, I saw the story. A sex scandal, where Wiener had been having online affairs. His credibility was totally shot. I finished my beer and disappeared out of the city again. And this is the first time I've used any kind of social media since. We've come to my secondary reason for posting this. I know Faye got remarried. I know my mother still holds a ceremony for me every year on my birthday, and my father died without knowing what happened to his son. I know Faye was into Reddit from the start of the site, and this subreddit is exactly the kind of thing she would be into. It's remote, a 1 in a million chance, but there's a possibility that she could hear this. Faye, if you are, please know I love you. I've never stopped loving you. I never wanted to hurt you, and everything I've done has been to keep you safe. I know you haven't sold the house yet. I lurk online using proxies and public internet access. There's a lockbox buried under the 3rd fence post away from the road. It has the first book we ever read to each other, and a handwritten copy of my wedding vows. I had hoped to give it to you on our 30th wedding anniversary, but that isn't looking likely. Do what you want with it. I love you.